Hello, world. Welcome back to D&D Beyond Live. Vampires. What are they all about? I brought an expert in to talk a little bit about vampires. Hi, I'm Joe. I'm the content clown here at D&D Beyond. Happy to be here. Joining me, B. Dave Walters, a man who needs no introduction, but I'll give him one. An expert in DMing and vampire lore and horror. An incredible performer, a very tall man, and a fantastic airport date. If there's an airport McDonald's and you need a date to it,
that is true.
Yeah, no better pick. B. Dave Walters, thank you for being here, man.
Yes, no, thank you for having me, sir. You superstar of the beautiful beard. Yes. Yeah, no, glad to do it.
Yeah.
Both D&D and vampires are near and dear to my heart. This is the part of the conversation where I have to point out vampires do not exist. But besides that, yeah, big fan of the genre. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So D&D's kind of got vampires on the brain right now. Obviously, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft coming in late May. You can pre-order it now on the D&D Beyond marketplace, and you're going to get all sorts of cool pre-order bonuses and goodies. So do that. But, that said, people are sort of gearing up, and I know a lot of people's brains are turning the little factory. The assembly lines are moving on like Domains of Dread and stuff like that. And so over the next little chunk of time, we're going to start getting into a lot of horror monsters and how to run them and all that good stuff. And this is probably the best place to start. And so I want to talk, let's talk creatively, and then we can talk, crunchily about vampires. Yeah. I want to hear some stat thoughts from you, sir.
Oh yes, that's all my training has literally led to this. Yes.
Oh, to this moment, perfect. So for folks who admittedly, and by folks I mean me, who might feel like, I don't know, do I feel a little doofy if I'm going like full vampire, at the table and stuff like that? What are some good like DM at the table running vampires to just like make them really fun and impactful and atmospheric and spooky? Like what's the B. Dave Walters guide to running a vampire at the table?
That's what I want the name of my autobiography to be. Also, first of all, always go full doof. 100% of the time, go full doof. Believe it or not,
sometimes we just need that permission,
It's true. Yeah, I have blessed you worthy to go full doof. Yes. I will say, believe it or not, the first thing I would recommend anybody that is thinking about telling these kind of stories read is an article on D&D Beyond by James Hake. Shout out to our homie, James Hake, about mind flayers and making mind flayers compelling villains, because everything he says about mind flayers in that article applies to vampires. Just in general, when you're talking about vampires, usually it is related to horror. Usually it's related to gothic horror. Not always, but Curse of Strahd is very much a gothic horror story. Sure. And there is a heavy gothic horror component to Van Richten's Guide, although there's some different kinds of horror in Van Richten's Guide too. And gothic horror is about tension and about ambiance. It is not always what you do, it is often what you don't do. It is not the vampire kicking in the front door. It is the ever-present, ubiquitous nature of the vampire. And that's one of the things that James points out in those articles with mind flayers. I'm using these interchangeably because these points are the same. In actual mind flayer, it's not that hard to kill. Like, I mean, a group of 4 to 6 people just like jump one, like you can kind of run it over in a round. The mind flayers know that too. And so they don't give you that chance. Their tactics operate from a place where they are giving themselves every advantage. When you talk about playing a vampire, it can be difficult to put yourself in the position of an immortal creature with a longer timeline, where you're dealing with a creature that getting revenge 50 years from now is viable in their minds. And so while your campaign may not have 50 years to wait, for the most part, usually these creatures aren't in a huge rush. They're more than willing to wait for you to come to them. They're more than willing to manipulate you. I'm doing a little show called the Black Dice Society right now.
I've heard about that.
I know, word on the waves. It's kind of dope. You know, that's what other people are saying. I don't know. I'm biased, but yeah. Thursdays at 4 Pacific on D&D Twitch and YouTube. And you know, we had the reveal that Strahd is a character in our game, but we intentionally conceptualized this where Strahd and Azalin and other dark powers are puppet masters behind the scenes. They are manipulating events in a way that will come to a head for the characters, surely, but it is their looming presence that you want them to feel first. You know, you should fight the vampires. Well, you should encounter the vampire's underlings long before you encounter the vampire. You should have an opportunity to talk with the vampire long before you fight it. You know, and that's one of the things about D&D that makes Ravenloft different. And makes D&D different from a lot of other games. If, for the most part, if you are confronted with an enemy, it is because you can defeat that enemy. If you come around the corner and there's an ogre, you guys are about to roll up this ogre. You know, like sometimes the dice, you know, RNG, this is a fickle god. The dice may not favor you, but for the most part, you were confronted with challenges that hopefully will be challenging, but you will overcome them. Ravenloft's not like that. Ravenloft's not like that at all. And this is one of the things that I really had to impress upon my players for Black Dice Society is that, you know, just because you see the monster doesn't mean run towards the monster. It very well may mean run away from the monster. That's why we started at level 1, because they're just such like delicate little squishy babies. Yeah. And you know, at a low level, a vampire is going to run over your group. Yeah.
Well, let's put it on. I want to put this on its feet a little bit and just make you do a bunch of weird stuff that I just thought of and that
my body's ready
to do. That's why I love you, sir. So let's say I want to teach my players the value of hauling ass away from a vampire, you know, at full speed. I'm trying to, as a DM, I'm trying to sort of instill that idea of, you know, you're not ready for this yet. You know, aside from obviously everyone charging and them losing 2 out of 5, right? Like, what are some ways that me as a DM sort of telling the story can show and not tell that, you know, that Gandalf moment of this foe's beyond any of you?
Fly, you fools. You can do it a couple different ways. I can think of 3 just off the top of my head. You've always got the Worf effect, where if you have a powerful NPC, let the powerful NPC get laid out. You know, in wrestling parlance, this is also, you know, jobbing. You job the hero to the new person. That's how you know the new guy's tough. He takes out the other tough guy. You're like, oh, that guy's tough now. That's why Worf loses so many fights. Yep. The second thing, drop somebody into death saves. Drop them into death saves quickly, you know, where they're like, I charge. Will a 25 hit you? Yeah, he punches you for 70 points of damage. And watch every jaw at the table drop if they're at a level that 70 is a lot, of course. Although I guess you kind of never really get to a point that 1 hit 70 is not a lot. Watch everybody's jaw drops and have to like pick their friend up and run. The adversary also is capable of doing non-lethal damage, just like players are. You can have them all get dropped in the first round and literally be like, you're not worth my time to kill, and leave. You know, I had a one shot I ran where there was a lich mind flayer because I'm extra, and I had him hit that first mind blast. Literally everyone failed to save. Everyone. And I'm like, so the mind flayer kills everybody and we're in for a short day. Okay, cool, great. But I just sort of had him, I apologize, a fly got in here. I've been doing battle with it. I just had the enemy be like, you guys are so weak. I'm just, I went full Azula. Like, you can revel in the shame of your defeat. Like, you're irrelevant to me, and just left.
Yeah.
You could do stuff like that. Like, don't
Well,
be
it's a great
afraid.
teaching moment too.
Mhm.
What you're setting up is that idea of now if they continue to pursue, and it's like your players haven't quite learned the lesson, then maybe it ratchets up a little bit. Maybe then someone hits that first death save, and they've got to drag them away. And at that point,
Yep.
hopefully they're learning. It's like were you a Mega Man X player way back
Yeah.
in the day?
Hmm.
Remember that first level where what's the dude's name? Vile shows up and you're just helpless. Like
Hmm.
you're shooting, you're doing everything you can, and just nothing touches this guy. And that feeling of helplessness. Just like the game was sort of like teaching you how to play, like you through this vampire who's just like, no, I've told you, like I'm done here. You're actively teaching your players instead of just being like, maybe you guys should go.
Yeah.
Which admittedly sometimes that's where I find myself just being like, am I not being clear?
Just, lay a beating on them sometimes. Like that's fine. I think the 2012 Ninja Turtle series did a really great job of this, where the first time they met Shredder, they got worked. The first time they met Bebop and Rocksteady, they got worked. And then over time, as they got a little better, they were able to go 4-on-1. And then later they were able to go 1-on-1. And then eventually you saw like they were the opposite was true. And Bebop and Rocksteady were no match for any one of them. And you got that, like, it is the clearest example I've ever seen in a show of characters leveling up without saying we've leveled up.
Yeah.
So in Shredder, who smashed them in season 1, Leonardo's able to defeat 1-on-1 in season 5 or whatever, because you had that arc. I think you also, something that's important here, and this is true of every game every time, and it can be overlooked, is you also have to be clear of what's the game everyone at the table is playing. Sure. Because if you've got someone who is only interested in hack and slash, and you put them in a losing battle, that person can become, very frustrated and unhappy. And that, one, you don't want to do that because this is a pastime, but two, that can derail the narrative if you're not careful. Let's say the opposite is true. If you have characters that are very much interested in the role play and the cosplay and the social aspects of the game, and you just drop them in this absolute combat meat grinder, that person is not going to be happy. Realistically, you should waive all of these experiences if not in every session over the course of the campaign, that everybody gets a little something. There's some traps and there's some riddles and there's some role playing, there's some fighting, a sousson of everything. But yeah, I think getting worked on occasion is good, because characters very quickly become overconfident because they're the heroes, and the game is calibrated against their capabilities. It is designed to win, which every once in a while, losing helps you think. Like, again, with Black Dice Society, in episode 1, we had a wedding scene. And it's funny because everybody's like, this is so beautiful. It is filling me with dread. Nothing can be this good. Something terrible's about to happen. And that, my friends, is gothic horror. You're like, here's this wonderful thing. And you're like, but it's not wonderful. It's not wonderful. Stop making me care about these people. You're going to take them from me. And I'm like, what sort of monster would do such a thing? But,
a bedave.
A bedave. Yeah. It is as much about what you... Horror is as much about what you don't see. It's more about what you don't see. That's why the first Alien movie is so frightening. I think the Alien has 12 minutes of screen time, I think. Otherwise, it's bumps in the dark. It's shadows. It's not quite knowing what it is, because your mind will fill in something scarier when you don't know.
Well, I love that comparison to the Alien franchise, because Alien and Aliens are almost two halves of one whole vampire campaign in D&D. If that makes sense. So sort of, let's continue to put this on its feet. And here's where I'm going to transition and ask you actually, sort of on the crunchier end of things, on the rule side of things, like what monsters you like playing, why, all that good stuff. Because, okay, so we have our scenario on its feet, right? Let's say our players, arrive in this, a standard issue, there's clearly a vampire town, right? Things are really sad and somber, and people are freaked out. People don't go outside at night, blah 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 blah, all that good stuff. They have their first encounter with the vampire, like you said. You know, they have their 2 rounds of vampire drops them, non-lethal damage, leaves, they pursue, vampire really drops one of them. They learn their lesson. Then I would assume as they continue to investigate, unless you're like some of my players who are just like, let's leave, we're gone, and then
Valid.
okay, very
Valid. Yeah.
But as we're continuing now this sort of vampire story, now we go from alien to aliens, because now we have to hit minions. Now we have to have that meat grinder. Let me ask you this, Dave Walters. What's your favorite vampire minion?
Let me just say one thing as an aside that I need to state for the record. When you're dealing with iconic creatures like vampires,
I thought you were going to say for the record, please stop calling me Dave.
No, please. Yes. No. You have to be mindful of what the players know versus what the characters know. Because oftentimes they'll do things like, oh, we just have to stake it through the heart. And I'm like, but do you know that? And why would you know that? You know, you can give things like arcana checks or history checks or religion checks to like know that a vampire is vulnerable to sunlight. Some things that are just completely ubiquitous to us aren't necessarily in the world, especially if there's not a reason why your character would have that. Although I do always laugh at that they're like, vampires are vulnerable to being staked through the heart. I'm like, so's literally everything with a heart. Like they're vulnerable to fire. It's like, so am I. Yeah, like what? So that's something to be mindful of. In terms of minions, I'm very agnostic about it. I personally love a lot of hapless mortals, especially if they know that the people are kind of like fighting against their will or mind controlled. Again, back to the mind flayer thing. I did this a lot with mind flayers. They were sending mind controlled townspeople against them that the heroes didn't want to hurt, but those people had no compulsion whatsoever about hurting them. Because then you add a moral component to it. You know, I mean, now you got some bloodthirsty players that aren't going to care, but then that, you know, that echoes, that has repercussions, that maybe when this is over, the child of the people you killed comes back seeking revenge way down the road. You know, that's rich storytelling opportunities for you there. I also like, you know, the vampire spawn that is an actual creature. Vampire spawn are fine. Any lesser vampires, you know, just in general, like if you remember underrated cinematic masterpiece Van Helsing, where,
and I do,
yes, where Dracula had his brides, you know, and the 3 of them are still vampires. They're just not as strong as him, that come out and worry and grief the players, you know. Any sort of undead is usually a good stand-in, especially if you're playing something like Curse of Strahd, for instance. A lot of people I take even a step further back than that. When I knew that I was doing Black Dice Society, when I knew that I was going to bring Strahd into the story, I got on a call with Chris Perkins, and I was like, let's talk about Strahd. You know, who is he? What motivates him? Like, why is he doing what he's doing? And what he said to me, he's like, one of the serially most overlooked things about Strahd is, yes, he's a very powerful vampire. He's also a very powerful necromancer. Nobody ever takes that into account with Strahd and what he does and why he does it. So having, you know, undead legions, for instance, if you're using Strahd, that's all completely viable, you know. And a thing that you will hear me get on my soapbox about a lot, especially with monsters, is intelligent creatures behave intelligently. As such, it theoretically could have done anything, you know. It's like I have this one ogre that I keep for special occasions, you know. There you go, get out there, you know. All viable. I also like this, you have to be careful with the group that there's not a lot of bleed, but doing things like getting the vampire to seduce one of the characters into helping, or at least not helping, you know, where it's like, hey, I will give you something you want all you got to do is sit this out when the fight comes. That's it. I'm not even going to ask you to raise your weapon against your friends. I'm just going to ask you not to raise your weapon against me. And
or
you
even,
can do.
yeah, I was gonna say, or even lock them into their own reality a little bit. You know, that Riley Silverman did a great piece for us on sort of adapting the ideas of WandaVision for D&D, and you know, those ideas of being locked into a world that's not quite right, and that kind of thing. And that's a super fun way to get in there.
That's what the myths are. That's what Ravenloft is, you know.
Absolutely.
But also, you want to mess with your players, take one of them into the next room and talk to them, and be like, don't tell, and when you come back, be like, don't tell anybody what we just talked about. And you can take them over there and you can try and get them to betray everyone. You can take them over there, just talk about Falcon and the Winter Soldier for 5 minutes, and then come back and be like, don't tell anyone what we just discussed. And watch,
what we just discussed was that dance was baller.
Watch everybody else's wheels start turning in their heads and like, oh no, oh no, oh no. Yeah. That's yes.
You know, he sort of brought up all of these sort of different vampire variants and all that good stuff. Our own Jeremy Bloom did an amazing job sort of breaking some of those down recently in this How to Play Vampires Like Apex Predators of the Night. So if you want some sort of specialized stats and abilities on some of these, make sure you go check that out. Got some questions for you from the chat, sir.
Oh, hello, chat. Hello. Thank you for joining us.
As usual, our chat often just frames good ideas in the form of a question.
My body's ready.
Let's do this. So Luca Black Dragon asks, this is interesting. What about vampires as allies or patrons for the heroes?
Undead Pact Warlock. Vampires can be patrons.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. And, you know, even, you know, you're sort of talking about these different ways that maybe a vampire can mess with people, the psychological aspect. What if they're behind the patron that sent them off on a journey or you know, something like that?
Yeah. Again, you know, even though alignments still exist in 5th edition, every edition they become a lesser and lesser, you know, obstacle. And the reason why I use them is just general guidelines of tendencies, but you can rationalize almost any course of action from almost any alignment's point of view.
Absolutely.
You know, that and when you talk about the spectrum of good to evil, that is a spectrum of selflessness to selfishness. Evil is selfishness, you know, just interchangeably. And because of that, you can have a creature that may want you to do something ostensibly good for the wrong reason, you know, like the vampire patron wants you to go wipe out the trolls that live in the forest, which are hurting people and is bad, but the reason why the vampire wants it to stop hurting people is that's its herd, they're its cattle, you know. And then you put them in that, well, you're like, do we do this? Like I enjoy playing with the moral conundrum of things. Like if you guys are familiar with me and my work, if not, hi, hello. I do a lot of level 20 storytelling. And at level 20, the game is very much less about what can you do and more about what should you do. Yeah. You know, because what can you do? The answer is lots. You know, what should you do? That's more complicated, you know. And you know, you can easily put your players in situations like that where you know, what is it? It's was it Macbeth or is it Hamlet? We find that which is the greatest treason, to do the right thing for the wrong reason. I think it's Macbeth, and I think I misquoted it anyway. But that, you know, all good things to play with. And again, you can have not just vampires, especially characters like devils. Devils are creatures of law. You know, they'll cut a deal with you. They'll cut a deal without fighting in a heartbeat. It might be a full lawyer. Yeah, it might be a bad deal, but they'll do it, you know. And if they're like, hey, check this out, here's what you got to do, sign right there. And then you really want to mess with your players, give them a good deal from a terrible person and just watch the gears start turning in their heads. No,
absolutely. Sellsword Virage asks, this is a good question. I'm playing a long game arc with vampires, but I also feel like I've waited too long to pull the trigger. How can I up the stakes for higher level players? Which I think kind of ties into what you were just talking about with, you know, amping up those moral conundrums.
Yeah, that if now, presumably what you're saying is like what would have been a big threat mechanically is less of a threat now that the characters are stronger. However, The stat blocks are up to you. I
Yeah,
routinely
sure.
take other stat blocks and reskin them. Go in D&D Beyond, look up a Sararak. I think a Sararak CR23 or something. Make your vampire a Sararak. He's a lich, he's undead, close enough, you know?
Yep.
Just for flavor, you're like, now we got a really strong vampire that will, be more of a foe. Make the townspeople, suicidally dedicated to them. Make the townspeople actually really love the vampire. Like Mark Mear's character, Brother Uriah in Black Dice Society, really thinks Azalin Rex is a fantastic king. He has not been mystically affected by this. This is the only world and the only life he's ever known. And so he would fight to defend Azalin. You can have good people and put them in that position and make it more complicated. But again, as DM, the numbers in the stat blocks are what you say they are. And if anybody tries to get meta, it's like that meme, like, yes, I've altered the stat block, pray I do not alter it further.
No, and that's fantastic advice in general. I'll have a thief drops into my games, but I'm not going to use a bandit stat block necessarily for them. Like that, no one says how to play. I'm going to use a monk stat block. I'm going to use something actually challenging. Like they're a bandit, but what else are they? I'd like to think bandit. That I'd like to think that all of my life experiences go into my stat block and not just you see me on Twitch sometimes, let's see here.
Like the hard-worn skull of your slain enemy on the shelf behind you there.
Yes. That's a story for another time, my friend. Someone made it for me. Lord Garthan asks, and I think this is a good question to sort of end this part of the stream on before we jump into the next part. Lord Garthan asks, is it also accurate to play Strahd like a creepy old guy who just can't handle rejection from a girl who never liked him? B. Dave, your thoughts?
Here's the thing. I mean, you can. I am aware of some lighthearted takes on Curse of Strahd. Some friends of mine play a campaign that I always refer to as It's Always Sunny in Barovia. You can. To me, Strahd is Darth Vader. And, Darth Vader also kind of can't get over a girl, but he's an ever-present menace. He is a wrecking ball. Like, Strahd showing up is supposed to be a problem. It is always supposed to be a problem. And if you make him too much of Uncle Fuddy-Duddy, the characters will not respect the adversary the way they should, in my opinion. That being said,
to be fair,
do it at your table however you do it.
Yeah, I mean, you can drop a frustrated and befuddled middle-aged white guy in a lot of situations, and they'll cause a lot of problems. Lightsaber, force power, Strahd.
I was about to say motions broadly at everything, and yes, I can imagine that is true. Yes, yeah. So again, do whatever you want to do at your table. That's just my take on it.
Here's my challenge to people who want to lean Strahd more that way. Think less comedy character and think more Strahd as John Cusack in High Fidelity. Intense, driven, not dumb, maybe a little misguided, passionate. That's my challenge for folks that want a slightly sort of funnier take on Strahd.
I also that is a valid one. I also give you a good Strahd touch point is Count Magnus Lee from Vampire Hunter D. He's just bored. He's like, I've seen everything, like I just whatever. Like I'm no longer evil. I'm indifferent. All those Strahd super evil.
Well, B Dave hashtag D&D says, how have I never heard of B Dave Walters? I'm about to consume so much content. Where to start? And I would assume, B Dave, that the best place for him to start would be the Black Dice Society.
That's definitely a lower bar because we're only 2 episodes into that one. We did our session 0.5 in episode 1, and you got time to watch those and be caught up in time for Thursday, so you can take the ride with all of us. Yes.